Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, you got a couple of us together, and we got a very, very special guest. Somebody I've been trying to get on for a while, and we finally made it happen. We will have PD Newman joining us today. But before we get to him, let me introduce the other rejects on the channel. And we got my man, the Headless Giant. What is going on, sir?
How you doing? I've got my Alchemy Monday show coming up tonight, and I've got the Mailbag show with Nick coming up on Thursday. So definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel and get out there and follow me on X and on Instagram as well. Thank you very much. Check out my videos.
Definitely send in that mail, and if you want, leave an address, and you'll receive some stickers. Thank you very much, my man. I appreciate you joining us. And my man, Jin, the Ninja. What is going on, sir? How are you?
What is up, boss, Mr. 93? So if you want to check me out, you can follow me on X Twitter at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn, or on IG at Threshold Saints, and also at Threshold Saints for the show account on X Twitter. And I had the great pleasure of recently interviewing Paul Frederick from the Demonosophy podcast with my Grey Lodge co-host, not Matt Murrah, but a different Grey Lodge co-host, as well as Gregory Peters, who wrote the recent book, The New Aeon Tantra. So two amazing interviews coming up, and lots of episodes coming out, so people can check that out. And there's a recent drop I just made on Final Fantasy VIII. So if you're interested in the Kabbalah of Final Fantasy VIII and sort of like the meta ontologies and meta magic that it may or may not contain, you can check that episode out. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate you making it here. And perfect timing. Unfortunately, forgot. Even though I told Headless Matt was joining us today, totally forgot you were coming, and I started without you, but you made it, Matt. So maybe you can unmute yourself and let everybody know what is going on and how you doing.
Sup, everyone. Glad to be here. Glad to meet you, Newman, Headless, and Marks for the first time. So I'm Matt. I mean, recently there was a episode here on Occult Rejects, so you can check that out. I guess it's gonna tell everything you need to know about me. And yeah, very glad. Let's see how it goes today.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate you making it, sir. And last but not least, we got the storyteller himself, Robbie Marks. How are you, sir?
Hello. Hope everybody's doing great out there. I'm R. Marks, or Robbie Marks. I'm an artist, illustrator. I do a lot of research. You can check out all my links for my podcast and all my various social media at Linktree RMARX, and that'll pull up everything for you. And it's good to see everybody here, some familiars that I love and some new faces. It's always great. I'm excited for the show, and thanks for having me on, Nick.
Of course, no. It was during the day I had to get you on, so I always appreciate you joining us. And finally, again, somebody I was very much looking forward to getting on the show. We have PD Newman, and if you're not sure who he is an esoteric researcher, a practicing occultist whose work sits at the crossroads of alchemy, hermeticism, theurgy, and shamanism. He's a Freemason, a member of the Society of Rosicrucians, and also is associated with the Martinist Order. So he's coming from the inside of Western initiatory tradition. He's published in several esoteric and Masonic journals, including the Scottish Rite Journal, Knights Templar Magazine, the Masonic Society Journal, Ad Lucem, and others. Some of his books are, this is great, Alchemically Stoned, The Psychedelic Secret of Freemasonry, Angels of Vermilion, if I'm saying that correctly, The Philosopher's Stone, From D to DMT. And the book we will be discussing today is Theurgy, Theory and Practice, the Mysteries of the Ascent to the Divine. So, yeah, after that introduction, if there's anything that you would like to add or anything you'd like to say or any places that you would like to plug for the people to find your stuff, PD, please let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. You can find my books at all major booksellers. I recently published a follow-up to Theurgy that is looking at Native American shamanism in the Mississippi Valley and their funerary rites, and how they were incorporating certain entheogenic plants to induce what we might call an out-of-body experience or near-death experience. But yeah, I'm on all the social media platforms. You can find me under PD Newman. If you want to keep up with what I'm researching, that's the way to do it.
Awesome. Thank you. Not to get off the topic, it's just something that you just said right now. And I was like, oh, that caught my attention. And I'm guessing maybe, from the other stuff that you've written about, maybe you might see what I'm getting at. Do you think some of these things that they might have been taking back then was to push themselves too close to an NDE? It was the extent of like, I'm going to
Absolutely.
poison myself before I actually die, so I can have it.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
And
Awesome.
that's not just an indigenous thing.
So,
Even in theurgy, um, which is really a ritual application of Platonic metaphysics. At one point, Plato says that philosophy is basically training to die, learning how to die. And he discussed this in terms of what was encountered by the initiates at the Eleusinian mysteries, at the greater mystery. Um, and there's plenty of evidence to suggest that what was actually going on with this Kikion potion they were drinking was that they were consuming some form of a hallucinogen. A lot of evidence points towards ergot, which is a precursor to LSD. Normally it's toxic, but there are ways to prepare it where it won't induce gangrene and what they call St. Anthony's fire. So yeah, I think learning how to die, approaching death, or as Brian Murarescu says in the Immortality Key, learning to die before you die. And if you can learn this, then when you do die, you won't die because you've kind of gotten your sea legs and can navigate that territory.
do you think, not to sound like crazy or woo-woo, do you think like maybe when you say you see legs, would that almost kind of give you maybe the options of where you're going?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe. Okay. All right. I
Yeah,
like that.
and here, in the material realm, we're very much predicated on space time, time really comes into play when we say, how long will it take me to get from point A to point B, um, traveling at a given speed, right? Well, in that realm, that's not necessarily the case. It's not so much the quantity of space and time that determines travel. It's the quality. It very much operates in the way that magic operates, like attracts like. So it's not that, let's say, you think of a place where you want to be, that's very quantitative. But if you can feel how it feels to be there, the feeling becomes the place, becomes the embodiment. So travel is very different, experientially, and the way it's discussed in after death manuals like the Bardo Thodol, which is what we know as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or in the Papyrus of Ani, which is what we know as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Navigation is very much predicated upon the quality, the qualia present within the traveler.
Really, I love it. I love it. Not to get too far ahead of ourselves. Unfortunately, I know I came right off the bat with a question that was kind of like, I'm sure it has to do with your book, but it
It's
was
a
just
good
something.
question.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I would love to nerd out on this, but I do want to stay on the topic, unfortunately. For one thing I do want to ask, for the listeners who may not know who you are yet, how did you first get into, like, I guess, the world of alchemy, hermeticism, and theurgy, if you don't mind?
Taking drugs. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
To be totally honest,
Maybe
taking
that's what did
drugs.
it for me too.
From about age 11 is when I first started taking LSD and mushrooms. And I live in the deep south where mushrooms grow in grain-fed cow fields. So we were learning how to identify them, and how to consume them before I was even a teenager. And back then, it was a novelty. It was very much a recreational kind of a practice. But pretty soon, as the doses increased and the substances got more complex, such as with NN-DMT and mescaline, I very quickly found myself in territory that I couldn't navigate philosophically, psychologically, and that's what led me to first look into metaphysical models, different religions. In Mississippi, It's not like, I had found parallels to things I was experiencing in Eastern texts like the Tao Te Ching, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, but it's not like here I can go and talk to a guru, and I had encountered a number of similar terms when I was much younger. I was spending the night with a friend, and there was a book on his shelf. He lived with his grandfather, and that book really attracted my attention. And when I pulled it down and was looking at it, he told me that's the Scottish Rite 32nd degree. That's what you get when you become a 32nd degree. My grandfather's a Freemason. And so I'm flipping through it, reading passages. I have absolutely no idea what I'm reading, but I knew right then that I was going to, at some point in my life, figure out what the hell is going on. What is this book about? But a lot of the same terms that I was encountering in these Eastern texts I found there, and Masonry is very visible here. The Scottish Rite was created in Charleston. Masonry is very much accepted practice in the South. The further north you get, the more conspiracy kind of minded views of Freemasonry starts creeping in. But here you don't see that. It's very respected. And so I petitioned a lodge, never expected to get in, but I got elected to take the 3 degrees, and it turned out to be absolutely what I needed at the time. And from there, just went on into, Hermeticism and Kabbalah and tarot and alchemy, and it's still going. Theurgy these days, Theurgy, Neoplatonism, the Hermetica. That's really where I spend my time these days. But yeah, that's how it came about.
That is awesome. I love it. One thing I did want to ask you, if you don't mind, if you had to, this is for like the newbies and kind of like, I guess I do have a lot of conspiracy theorists too that listen to the show. So I'm going to ask you this question basically for them. If you had to explain theurgy to someone who only knows magic from pop culture, what's the simplest, most accurate definition you'd give them? Because,
Well,
I'm just saying the idea we have of it from Hollywood is probably completely wrong. So,
to borrow a phrase from the Christian scriptures, thy will be done, right? With magic, it's very much predicated upon the accomplishment of one's desires. It's largely ego fulfillment. It can be other things, but usually it's because I want X, and this spell is designed to give me that result. With theurgy, those things can still happen, but they're a byproduct of the real goal of theurgy, which is union with God or with the gods or with a god. But it's basically, and when we say union, it's easy to think of, it's not like a hug, it's not like two people hugging. It's losing your egoic perspective, and for a brief moment chasing your consciousness to its root and perceiving the world as God perceives the world, or as a God perceives the world. So that's how theurgy differs. It means God work, or the work of the gods. So there's also this idea that it- man cannot affect theurgic union. That's purely up to the gods. It's the grace of the gods, whether they reach down and lift that veil for you. All we can do is work on what in the literature is called epitadieties, which means our preparedness, how much we've prepared ourselves to have that veil lifted. That's really the limit of what man is capable of in terms of theurgy.
thank you. I would couldn't have said it better. I'll have to say, even like in my time as being a magician or a ceremonial magician, whatever, theurgy worked. It was a different experience with that stuff. I was very, very big into that once I started having which I call magical experiences. I will say, whenever it came to maybe me feeling something, whether it could be maybe just myself feeling good about what I just did or whatever, it was during theurgy, like practices, actual like prayer and devotion to God. that is times where I may actually felt like I had contact.
Mhm.
It's very deep stuff for me. And I try to do. I have mentioned that on the show a couple of times, but I do think, just from my experience, from how I practice, I think that stuff is highly important, just for me.
Mhm. I agree.
So,
And in ceremonial magic, we see analogs. Um, Particularly, there are a few in the Greek magical papyri. The Book of Abramelin is a great example. And that text, the daemon, one's daemon, a daemon is, as it says in Plato's Symposium, is any being that acts as a mediator between man and the gods, and they carry man's aspirations to the gods in the form of prayer, sacrifice, ritual activities, and in return they bring down from the gods to man inspirations. And inspiration literally means to take the god inside oneself. And so we're essentially talking about possession. And post exorcist, the possessions is terrifying to most people, the idea that you can be possessed by a spirit. But in theurgy, that's the highest grace, to be inhabited by a god. And there's a caveat that we should mention, and that's that in theurgy, we're never not inhabited by the gods. Everything happens because of the gods. What changes is our ability to perceive that. Everything down to from stones to animals, and if you're in if you're in Hermetic Kabbalah, you're aware of correspondences, right? That if we're going to work with Tifereth, we're going to work with things. In the metal kingdom, we're going to go for gold. In the mineral kingdom, sulfur. Animal kingdom, we'll go for lions, roosters. All of these examples didn't originate in Kabbalah. It comes from the Jews in exile encountering Neoplatonists in late
right.
antiquity. And the Neoplatonists, they don't call them correspondences. And it's important, this is an important distinction, because it's easy to psychologize magic and say, well, if I surround myself with red things and increments of 5, psychologically I'm trancing myself into Gebura, right? But for the Neoplatonists, it's not a mnemonic, it is the god. They call it sunthemata and symbola, which means tokens and symbols. And what tokens and symbols are think of them as like fractals of the god sewn throughout the cosmos. And the idea is to bring together from every kingdom of nature the token of the god, and by doing that you make a fit receptacle, what's called a hypodoken. You prepare it, it's epitodietes, you're increasing its ability to capture something of the ray, like a mirror capturing the ray of the sun, and it can inhabit this a statue or a talisman. So it's different in that we're not psychologizing it, which, as much as I love the Golden Dawn system, I see a lot of Golden Dawn practitioners do is psychologize the system. That kind of thinking makes no sense to the Neoplatonists, the Theurgists in late antiquity.
Would you say that might have been like Plotinus's issue with the Gnostics too? Because I think when I looked into that, it might have been like them kind of humanizing things that weren't supposed to be humanized.
Plotinus, when you read his Enneads, you get an ambivalence from him. He's got a chapter in there called "Against the
Yeah.
Gnostics,"
Yeah.
but in that chapter, it's not the dualism he's attacking, it's the notion that the demiurge is evil, because
Oh,
the concept of the demiurge comes from Plato's Timaeus, where demiurge, which just means builder, we might even say it means mason, but the builder comes along and uses the forms, the Platonic forms, the ideas that exist in the nous, or the mind of God, the highest God, and he forms them into everything we see around us, and then he creates psyche or soul to animate them, which is where we get our word anima, If you're familiar with Jungian psychology, anima just means soul, but it's the root of the word to animate something. Well, the Gnostics, they're primarily coming from a Jewish background. So they're Jews who have been raised on Genesis, on the Torah, and now they're encountering Plato, and they realize that there is truth in both, but how do I rectify it? And when you look at Genesis in chapter 1, it says that Elohim created man. And when he created him a spiritual being, created him a hermaphrodite. But then by the time we get to chapter 2, Elohim disappears, and it says that Yahweh, the tetragrammaton, created man of the dust of the ground and then separated the female out of the male. So the Gnostics reading this, they come to the conclusion that, oh, Elohim must be this higher God principle, while Yahweh, tetragrammaton, is this demiurgic
Demiurge, yes.
principle and has trapped the spirit of man into matter, into the dust of the ground, and essentially created a prison for him. That's what Plotinus is taking issue with, because the demiurge for Plotinus is the nous, is the mind of God itself. So when we think about the hierarchy of being in Neoplatonism, there are three things called the hypostases, which they're comparable to the Holy Trinity. In fact, they inform the Holy Trinity. At the top, we have the monad, or the pege, which means the source, the one, and it's beyond being. That means technically it doesn't exist in the way we exist. It's beyond being. Now, below that is the nous, or the mind of God. And this is what became the Logos, or the Son, right? So now we've got the Father and the Son, the Logos. And then below that is Suke, or soul, the world soul. And this becomes the Holy Spirit in early Christianity. So what Plotinus understands by demiurge is the same thing Christians understand by the Son, by Christ. So this is the mind of God that is the demiurge, that through its intelligence organized all of the forms into something, we could say it informed matter into something useful, meaningful, with process and growth and choice, you know. So that's what he's attacking.
Yesterday we had Peter Mark Adams talking about the temples with the help me out, Nick. Completely blanked. The temples that they had in Rome. No, in Rome, with the underground temples where they would go, and I don't know why I'm blanking on it so hard, but they were talking about how in the experience with the
Mithraeum.
Yeah, the Mithraeum. There you go.
Okay.
In that experience, they would approach the demiurge as they were indwelt by the Spirit of God, right? And so that was sort of their view into looking at the demiurge from the more European perspective, as opposed to thinking that it had to be an evil force. And I think that's really reflected in a lot of the mystery school teachings is the demiurge, the guy who's making all the physical stuff. Yeah, you might not like it all the time, but it's essentially good because you wouldn't exist without it.
And that's essential to Platonism as a whole. Platonism is radically monist. So there's a hierarchy of being with the monad at the top. There is no devil. There is no evil principle. Everything exists. Everything participates in being because it participates in the good. Now we can act in a way that causes what's known as privation of the good, almost like erecting an umbrella over us so that the sun won't shine on us. But that doesn't automatically create evil. It simply is not participating in the good to the degree that one could. And instead of evil, that's looked at as more as a tendency toward non-being. So there's not good and evil, but there is being and non-being. And even non-being, if we go back as far as Parmenides, non-being can't be because it's not. So it's acting in an illusory way that's for something that can never happen, right? So yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at. But when I say that Plotinus was a little bit ambivalent, he still had Gnostic tendencies, because you'll see him say in another place in the Enneads, he says that matter is evil. That if evil exists, it's in matter. And Plato would completely disagree with that. Pythagoras would disagree with that. It's simply the bottom of the chain of being, where all of those rays, all of those chains descending from the one, from the forms, meet and mingle and produce all of the phenomenology that we encounter. So there was a certain self-loathing with Plotinus in terms of being in a body, and this translated even to his student Porphyry, who organized the Enneads. Porphyry um, is said to have been suicidal at more than one time in his life, because he was in a body. He felt so ashamed that he was in a body. And
Paul
this
trying to
kind of
tell him to go away
thinking,
for a while or go on vacation. Didn't he tell him to go away for a bit and get your head clear?
you'd think, yeah. But when Iamblichus comes along, Porphyry writes this letter to Aniba, which is one of Iamblichus's students, and he's trying to say theurgy is pointless. It's not a worthwhile practice, and it's Iamblichus that answers him in the guise of an Egyptian priest, Abammon, I think the name he chooses is. But he has a very different view. So Plotinus sees the soul, part of the human soul, is always united with the one. Meaning the soul is not fully descended into matter. Iamblichus wholeheartedly disagrees with this and says, no, we are fully descended. That's why what we do matters. And that if we weren't fully descended, there would be a gap in the chain of being here, that it wouldn't connect all the way, and thus would negate the possibility of ascent, of return to what's called epistrophe, return to the God. So we're in a constant motion of pruodos and epistrophe, going down and going up.
Right.
So he says, no, we're completely embodied. Moreover, the body is not a prison for the soul. It's the means by which the soul can even express itself, because outside of the realm of the space-time continuum, change can't happen. There's no process, there's no time, right? So how can we learn, make our mark on the world? How can we do anything unless we are fully descended, and unless the body is that the means by which that the spirit is able to make those changes? Yeah, so there's even disagreement within the domain of Neoplatonism, and Plotinus. While it's clear he was probably familiar with theurgy, because he uses language that originates with the Chaldean oracles, and the Chaldean oracles is where we first encounter the word theurgy. This father-son team, both known as the Giuliani, both of their names were Julian. But they're the first ones that talk about theurgy. And Porphyry, he gives us the schematic, kind of the way theurgy works, but then later in life rejects it in favor of his master Plotinus's picture of uniting with God purely through philosophical means. But Iamblichus rejects this. He says, we can talk all day, but at some point the words run out. Dialectic can only get us so far. And when the words run out, that's where theurgy begins. That's when ritual activity picks up, um, and can only be the final means by which we connect with the gods. And at one point he's talking about the synthamata, the tokens, and how they're magical items. Like if we had a piece of gold to connect us with Helios, he's saying it's not our intellectual understanding of the fact that gold corresponds to Helios. He said if that was the case, then any philosopher would be uniting with God or with the gods all the time. He said, no, it's ritualistic actions that are not understood by the practitioner, and the token affects our scent of its own power, of its own connection to the god, that it's a real connection. And once you start viewing the world in that way, everything changes, because you're interacting with divinities all the time. There's not a moment that you can't. So very similar in a way to the Egyptian religion, where when they saw an ibis, they're not thinking, oh, he corresponds to Thoth or Tahuti. That's Tahuti right there, you know. And
Indeed.
that's how the theurgists are approaching the world. They're approaching the gods in fractal microcosmic forms with everything they touch.
So
And
would you
in-
consider it more of an animism type religion as opposed to being more of a polytheistic or a monotheistic or monist?
It's polytheistic, but it's also um, the problem arises because you encounter sayings like all of the gods are present in Zeus, but Zeusically. All of the gods are present in Hera, but Heraically, right?
Mm.
So each of the gods are the one god, but this is how they manifest in this given scenario. And also our epitadieties, our preparation, alters the way we perceive the god, because one person might see it one way and another way. And this is addressed in Iamblichus and Proclus. And the solution, they're saying that it's not that the god has changed. Gods are changeless. It's that people are prepared differently to interact with the one divinity, with the one God. So all of the gods are, I don't want to say descended from, but they're part of what's called Siri, which means chains.
Mm.
They're part of the chains of these forms that exist, like kind of like archetypes that exist in the mind of the one God. So they're all one thing, just like in Kabbalah, all of the Sephiroth are united in Kether, right? It's only after the supernal triad that they begin to be separate. So in the Nous, all of the gods are one God. These are ideas in his mind, but based on what idea is being expressed through what activity, that determines how we perceive the God, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Robbie, was there something you wanted to ask?
Oh, I was going to bring up the fact that when you get into the Chaldean oracles, they talk about it's the whisperings of Apollo, but he always takes advice from Zeus. So again, you have this chain, this idea of linking back to source. And it's interesting in regard to talking about theurgy and become like taking on the energetic view of reality from the standpoint of the god. When you get into like voodoo, we were talking about the other night, where the gods actually come down as a rider and participate and dance with the humans, and they talk directly to God. And then you get into, like you're talking about, heresies against the Gnostics, and these ideas of the separation between those that are seeking theurgy and those that are externalizing it, and shying away from. And so you have this diametric cleave, essentially, that has been a battle. It's seemingly as far as you can go back.
Yeah, it exists today. Anytime somebody talks about mind over matter, you know,
Mm,
or um, favors intellectual learning over pumping iron, you know, these are false divisions, and
mm,
that you can just as much worship Mars, Aries, through reading Sun Tzu or going and lifting some iron in a gym.
right,
You know,
right.
those practices are uh, equally effective in terms of worshiping the gods. It's a false division. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Now,
And
one thing,
Iamblichus calls it taking on the mantle of the gods.
right?
And I think that's what you're describing. And we have something very similar in Palo. I'm a Palo practitioner, and then Palo Kimbisa, which has its origins in Congo, just like voodoo.
Right, right.
You know, possession is a very real aspect of it, and even communication with the gods through simple divination practices. You know, I'm sure you've encountered the use of cowries and Santeria and Lukumi. We use chamalongos, which are these coins cut out of coconut husks that are concave on one side and convex on the other. And so just like with the cowries, you know, you ask your question, throw them, and the concave side up, those are mouths speaking. Those are a yes. So you could, you know, there's a range of yes and no's and maybes, and rephrase your question. Yes with conditions, no with conditions, those kinds of things. But even that, while seen as trivial by Judeo-Christian traditions, by Islam, we take that very seriously. And no matter what the answer is, that's what you do. You know what I mean? You don't say, oh, well, that's good advice, but I think I'm going to do something else. Part of how you imbue that practice with real power is by always doing what it says. And in that, there is a show of faith. And through that show of faith, there is the increase of the ancestors, the mpungos, the gods, the daemons, to want to actually give you useful information because they know that you're going to follow through with it. And when you do, you know, you become a force of the universe. You're no
That's right.
longer trying to carve a hole out of a mountain. You are a tidal wave because you have the movement of creation behind you.
Right.
Well,
And
this
I
kind of
have
brings in.
let me bring one point up real quick. I've speculated over the years that the Knights Templar logo, in regard to the two riders and one horse, is exactly describing this process.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've never heard that take, but I
go
like
ahead.
that.
Headless, yeah.
Well, I was going to say this brings in the concept of the muse, how inspiration can strike one person, and unless you follow through with the instructions and the inspiration that's been given to you, that muse can leave you, and you won't get it back in the same form or in the same type of.
That's absolutely right.
People think,
Inspiration is slippery little clouds, you know.
yeah,
And if it comes to you and you don't act on it, you better believe somebody else is going to have the same idea shortly after. And if they act on it,
No, ain't that the truth?
tough shit.
Yo, you know what's crazy? You know how many times I shit you not, even with other co-hosts on the show, I would talk about topics that we would cover, and then we would never get to do it, and somebody else a few weeks later would be like, fuck, man, like what's the odds?
Yeah. Yeah, you got to act on
And
it.
it's happened a lot to where it's like freaky.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at,
go ahead.
I was going to say, when you look at the cotton gin, there were numerous people that came up with the patent at the same time. Same thing with the Wright brothers. There was another couple of brothers on the other side of the earth, you know, that were formulated. It's these things are in the air. I think it's the intrinsic fractaline nature of the growth of what we are as a whole, as humanity, that's kind of persisting and pushing towards some unseen divine end.
Yeah, Darwin too. You know, Darwin came up with the theory of evolution at the same time as a completely unconnected researcher came up with it. And if we look at like Empedocles, who was a pre-Socratic philosopher, but also a magician and a goees, what we might today call a necromancer. But he talks about ideas as conscious beings, and they come to you, and if you entertain what they are and give it voice, they will stay with you and come to
Right.
you more often. But if you
Mhm.
don't, he says they will fly off and find someone that is more in line with what they represent, and that person will receive the idea. And even into Christianity, this idea in Saint Augustine where he mentions, he says, if you were to see an angel, he says angels don't have bodies, they're not material objects, so you wouldn't see them with your eyes. You would instead encounter them in the realm of ideas. They would come to you as an epiphany, as a revelation, you know. So it's this idea that ideas are conscious and have motives of their own. And if you are too lazy in the moment to act on it, um, they don't wait. They have no patience.
Very
Epiphany
mercurial.
Epiphany is
Yeah,
a
yeah,
funny
yeah.
word because in Greek, it means the appearance of a god, right? That's the theophany, is the epiphany. And to us, it's like, well, I just had an idea. And so we've sort of lost the concept of how sacred these thoughts can be and how
Right.
connected they are to the rest of the universe.
And how does it feel when you have an epiphany? It comes with a sense of enthusiasm,
Right.
right? And enthusiasmos, it means the God is inside me, you know. So inspiration, enthusiasm, epiphany, all of these ideas, we talk about it artistically, but really what we're dealing with is the reality of divine forces putting their fingers on us and, you know, hoping probably that we'll do something with it. But I have a feeling that there's no hope, there's no chance involved. They know if you will, they know if you won't, and there's probably more to do with teaching a lesson, you know. Like you
Mhm.
just said, you don't do the podcast on that, somebody else does. That teaches you the lesson to don't hesitate, act now, live in the moment. There is no future, there is no past, there's this eternal spinning gray minute, and that's the one opportunity.
Yeah, and I guess it also comes back to what you were talking about. I don't know the name you used, but the in Portuguese would be búzios, which is like the concave stuff that they use to
Hmm.
get the
Hmm.
information from. Where it's like whatever information you're getting there, it's most likely what it should follow already. Like you're in
Hmm.
theory it's supposed to be already something important, so go and follow it. Don't discuss it. It's like intuition. You get the intuition, follow it. Otherwise, you're
That's
not
right.
gonna follow, and you're gonna see, oh fuck, I should have. Like, why not?
That's exactly
So
it. Yeah.
I remember one time I saw an interview with David Lynch, and he was going on about the whole point of forgetting an idea or losing an idea, and like how devastating that can be to an artist. Where he was saying you may want to actually kill yourself because you don't want to lose it. It was something crazy like that.
Yeah,
Or you're
and
gonna
he's
Yeah.
probably doing his little,
yeah, his
you
little
know, feeling for the. I love
yeah,
David Lynch. Rest
yeah,
his
so do
soul.
I. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
no, I swear, yeah, he has said some great stuff. Did any of you have other questions and stuff? I don't want to be the only one.
Well, I was gonna say, as an artist myself, I have a notebook. I have post-it notes. I'm constantly writing things down to remind myself for inspiration to move forward, for that enthusiasm. But it's interesting when you get into these ways of touching on these divine energies. You have, like we were talking about, bringing the God into yourself. You have the inspiration that comes to you. You have divination practices. You have dreams, and these things, following the origins back, through ancient Chaldea into the Canaanites, going back to Nimrod, going to the fourth son of Noah, and learning these divinate. And they even say that the use of ecstatic practices was most likely brought into India by the Scythians. So it's this transient kind of ecstatic philosophical belief system that is kind of branched out and connects so many of these systems, but to many is looked at, even though it's one of the oldest practices, it's looked at as you know potentially evil, because of the unknown, because of the fact that people don't understand the concepts and haven't realized that they are as well participating in these things.
Right, all the time.
Yes.
All the time. We're always participating in the gods, in the muses. But the idea of evil has become so prevalent with the introduction of Judeo-Christianity into the thought model. And it's ironic because both of these religions insist they're monistic. There's one God. But if we're going to posit a devil, we've created a dualistic framework.
Right,
If he's
right.
equally powerful but opposite, we're in Zoroastrian territory. We've
Yes, yes.
left monism. And that's what I like so much about Orthodoxy, about the really early Christianity, like Origen. He talks about apokatastasis. Apo meaning not, kata meaning going down, and stasis meaning stay there. So he's refuting the idea of an eternal hell, saying that makes no sense. If Christ's sacrifice was truly absolute, there can be no remainder, not even a devil, you know. But it's carried so far up into modern times. We look at grimoires with like goetic texts and the princes of hell and commanding demons. When you look at the etymologies of the names of these demons, at least half the time they're the names of pagan gods. They've just been recast as demons. So um when you encounter Astaroth, we're encountering Astarte. We're encountering Inanna, who is um and on the material plane, the planet Venus. She's the one that has the power to enter the underworld and get back out again, which was unheard of.
Right.
Because that's really like with Hades in Greece. You if you're dead, you go there and you don't get out except maybe one time a year, and it's temporary. Or if you're in there, you don't get out permanently, which is why the Eleusinian mysteries were such a big deal, because it opens the door for that possibility. That's why Christianity originally, as it was originally conceived, was so important. People don't think about the fact that when Christ was crucified, he was crucified in a Platonic cosmos. Hades is a Greek idea. And in the creed, if you read the creed in Orthodoxy, it says that immediately after he was crucified, he descended into Hades
Right.
to release the saints, right? And he's going to give them mansions in his father's house. Well, his father's house, what he's talking about, what every Greek and Roman person at the time recognized from that language, he's talking about Olympus, where the gods live, but men have never been allowed to go. So it's interesting because he's both confirming the Greek cosmoconception and overturning it at the same time by changing the
Right, right.
rules. But it still wasn't new, because this is what we had been seeing with the mystery traditions, with the
Right.
Orphic tradition, when Orpheus, even though he doesn't succeed in getting Eurydice all the way out of Hades, the possibility exists.
Oh,
So
yeah.
fascinating way that this stuff flip-flops, and we inherit this idea of demons when really it's a corruption of the word daemon. And a daemon, there are orders of daemons, but at the top of the order of daemons are angelos, which is where we get our word angels, which means messenger, just like Hermes, just like we said earlier about what daemons mean. They're messengers that exist between man and the gods. But
It gets so much worse when you translate daimones into the Roman, which then becomes genius. So
Yeah,
now by condemning the demons, you're condemning your own genius in some ways. It's
right.
like that's the spirit that expresses through your body.
And we think about that wrong. In modern times, we think of a genius as somebody that has a natural proclivity for a certain thing, whether it be mathematics, science, music, but that's not a genius. A genius, you acquire your genius through devotional practices, through doing the very thing that your character incarnated to do. And that Socrates called it his daemonion, which is just another way of saying his daemon. But
Right.
yeah, your genius is something that you acquire, and once you do, you are linked up with the gods, because the genius, the daemon, is never not in line with the god above him, right? So you become a tidal wave. Your output gets just skyrockets. Your ability to burn through books, especially if they're books in which you're vitally interested, there's no limit, you know.
Right. Right.
Um, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced that. I know when I first got on this path, had my first, to put it in woo-woo terms, like spiritual awakening, I couldn't get enough. I'd spend 8 hours a day in the bookstores. I didn't have any money, so I couldn't buy the books, but I'd sure as fuck sit in there and read them, and there was no limit to how much I could fit up here, and I
Yeah.
never had that capacity prior.
Does anybody have any more questions before I ask something a little bit? Oh, you
Sure.
ready?
Sorry, Nick. I'll jump in. I know I've been a little quiet. PD, would you say that those higher noetic experiences, I know you said you use psychoactive substances at the very beginning, but like when you were engaging in those noetic processes of like reading, engaging with the text or the fire of perception, it's very Geberatic and Hasidic at the same time because you're bringing sort of an synthesis into Tiferet. So would you say that you were following a particular hermeneutic through those texts, or a particular, even an ideological or cosmological one? Like, what are the particulars that helped you sort of engage with that?
Not at the time, because I didn't know anything. At the time, I was just gathering information. It would be a number of years before uh, I really started getting my hands on maps like the Atz Chaim, the Kabbalah tree of life, and once I had these maps and had acquired this new language, I could interpret the information that I had read and retained. But at the time, I was a tabula rasa, man. I had no idea what was going on, and that part of that I liked. There was a certain sacred kind of vulnerability, being suspended in the mystery, and
Mm.
I think that was integral to the beginning of the journey. But no, I had no uh, framework by which to interpret even my own experience at that point. So it was simply pick it up, read it, put it down, and then as I read further texts, I'd compare, contrast, find analogs. If they didn't agree, the next step is rectify that, find a text that meets them in the middle, explains why it doesn't fit. Um, but one of the first books that I read, and I haven't read it, and it's been 20 years, so I don't know how it holds up today. But it was a book by Dao Malachi called Gnosis of the Cosmic Christ, which is a Sophian Gnostic approach to Kabbalah. And that was very helpful because I was experiencing a degree of cognitive dissonance, with reading Kabbalistic texts and Gnostic texts. Because remember, I was largely going from things I've encountered in that Scottish Rite book. And there's a lot of talk of Kabbalah and Gnosticism in there with no effort made to distinguish the two. Um, And so once I started diving into those texts, it was clear there's some crossover, but they're not talking about the same thing. And Dao Malachi, back then at least, like I said, I don't know how that holds up today. I don't know how I would feel about that book today, but it did smooth some things over for me and pointed me in other directions. And there was even a time when I wrote him. I must have been 18 or 19. But I said, I can relate to a lot of things you're describing in here, because he's talking about visionary experiences through ritual, which I hadn't experienced yet. I didn't experience anything like that until I started practicing yoga, and then got into magic. But I was saying, a lot of what you're saying I've encountered, but it was on substances like psilocybin and LSD. And I said, Where do you stand on this?" Because nowhere in the book does he discuss that. And he was gracious enough to open up with a stranger about that and say, well, these practices don't work for everyone. The ones that they don't work for, he said that everyone that comes to me, we start with these practices. If they continue to do them properly and still aren't getting results, he said, I call those hard cases. And with them, I take them to the Native American church and they get a dose of peyote. And usually they come back and it gives them, a frame of reference. They say, oh my God, I get it. Then they go back and say, okay, let's start over and see if we can do these practices and see if you recognize any of the phenomena that you saw on the peyote. And I thought that was a pretty smart way to go about it.
Open the
Yeah,
door.
would you say even after that you got to know and practice like magic and all this stuff, if you ever did something again, like any substance?
Psychedelics?
Yeah, exactly. If you
All the time.
if you felt the difference, like from doing it after that, you kind of have a bit of more control maybe over that kind of.
The first thing I noticed after going back to psychedelics, because I took a break from them for a long time to try and get a frame of reference for that territory from somebody who knew more than I did. But when I returned to them, the first thing I noticed was that it wasn't free anymore. I couldn't just go in there and laugh and trip out and have a good time. Every time it was like, okay, this is work, get to work. So that's one way that I still use them often, especially on solstices, equinoxes, full moons, new moons. I try my best to ritualize it, but it's always work, and there are also more consequences. Early on there weren't really consequences, but you really see in real time the consequences, not just of actions, but of intentions, thoughts, tendencies to react to the world in a certain way, like the Buddhists call
Right.
sankhara, your tendency to respond in a certain way. And you see that in real time. And, ignorance is bliss. I was probably seeing that in real time at 11 and 12, but I wouldn't have recognized it. But being in a place where I recognize it, yeah, it's absolutely changed the way I do it. To quote Jim Eshelman, who I'm sure some of you
I know
with a
who he is.
background in Thelema know Jim, but he said one time to me, he said, I never bring psychedelics to my ritual, but I always bring ritual to my psychedelics. And that's me for sure.
Nice.
P-
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt. I have a quick
Yeah, go.
follow up for you, PD, from your previous comment, but even the one you just sort of articulated now, is that would you be comfortable if you described your sort of journey into these the higher gnosis as a bride, perhaps traveling through that path and into Yesod, seeing the world for the first time like preconceptually not having names for things, and then perhaps crossing into that carnal ground of ideas, as you said, being able to throw everything up in the air and also rectify. So that's a very Yesodic kind of property, is to be able to sort of bring all things into synthesis at Tiferet, but then also bring it down back into Yesod and say, yeah, this is perhaps closer to the truth, or perhaps has a contour closer to the truth.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for starters, I see any psychedelic drug as being related to the supernal triad. At least has the potential to get you into those spaces. You might not stay there. Everything that goes up must come down. But
Right.
for the lower Sephiroth, there I still associate them with drugs. If I do a stimulant, I understand that it's propelling my psyche into code. If I do an aphrodisiac, it's propelling my consciousness into Nedzach. I see it that way. Now,
Well,
in my
sorry,
personal
PD. Apologies.
no, in my personal journey, before I had any language for this stuff, and what really made me say I need somebody to kind of give me a leg up here because I don't know what's going on. It was I must have been 16 because I was driving, so I know I had my driver's license. And my younger brother, um, Michael, he's on X as God Sauce, brilliant guy, way smarter than me. But we had gone to a festival in Memphis that it's called Memphis in May, which is kind of like
I've,
Memphis's Mardi Gras.
I've been there a bunch of times. I love
Yeah.
that festival. Yeah,
Well, if you've been there back in the 90s, you probably remember
I
Hippie
was.
Hill,
Yep.
where all the hippies would be playing bongos around the Elvis statue. Um, and
Yes.
we expressly went there for the purpose of getting LSD because every time
Mm,
we'd ever been there, we'd found some. But I didn't want to drive with it, you know.
mm,
So we found this guy that we were familiar with, and I bought 7 hits for each of us, me, my brother, and 2 other friends that were with us. And we didn't have anything to put it on, so we've got this puddle of 7 drops in our hand,
mm,
and we all look at each other and we're like, "Yeah, let's just down it and jump in the car, and hopefully we'll be home before this gets out of hand." Because Memphis is about an
agreed.
hour drive from
Yeah.
Tupelo, and it it was a traumatic drive. I'll say that. Now, when we finally stopped the car and we're all getting out. We stopped at the friend's house who we were all supposed to hang out, but he was kind of wigging out, wanted to go home. So we drive him home, and I tell everybody, get out, stretch your legs. We still have to drive some more, but let's take a breather. And my brother won't get out of the car. And he won't communicate with me. He's not
Mm,
responsive. He's not catatonic, but he's completely disconnected from the world. And as this evening goes on, he does some things that I can't, to this day, can't explain.
mm,
Magical type things. And finally, he tells me in this joking kind of way, he's like, I don't know why I'm telling you this. You're just a puppet, you know. But he says, I'm God. I know I'm God. It, I am the one. And I was like, buddy, you're just tripping. You're not handling the LSD well, but you're not God. I promise. I know your mother. You were born. You know.
mm,
Um, but he's like, no, I am God. I wore this mask my whole life. And tricked myself into believing I was that mask. He said, but now I realize I am all of you, and I am basically the only thing that's real. I work you all like puppets. And he's like, again, I'm only telling you this because I just need to say it out loud, because you don't matter. You're just a puppet, you know. And I had no idea what to do with this.
Mhm.
I end up calling my mother, you know, and I'm like, Mom, sorry I woke you up. But I gave Michael 7 hits of acid and he thinks he's God. And I need you to explain to him that you pushed him out of your vagina so that he can understand that he can't be God if he was born. I said, because in my state, I was like, logically, that would mean you were the bigger God if you produced
Right.
him.
And you're still
And
blazing.
oh, yes. And so this is back when, you know, there were no cell phones, so we had to borrow a wireless with the long antenna phone. And she's like screaming at me, "You did what?" You know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, just please talk to Michael so I can get him home, because by this point he's gotten out of the car but won't get back in. Um, and he takes the phone, and I can hear my mom screaming, and he looks at the phone and just effortlessly snaps it into 2 pieces and throws these pieces away. So,
Oof.
long story short,
This is
this night, this was a very traumatic night. Um,
Mm.
After about 72 hours, he finally, that look left his eyes, and he seemed to be somewhat back to normal. But to be 100% honest, you can go read his ex posts. He's never fully come down. He's still,
Mhm.
he is God. He is the one. We're all puppets. That's never left him. It forced him into a permanent solipsism, you know.
Mm.
So I always thought at that time that he just kind of lost his shit on LSD. It wouldn't be for another maybe 6, 7 months that I took 3 hits of LSD with 2 hits of mescaline.
Mhm.
And I saw firsthand what he meant, what he was talking about. Uh, I was the universe. The
Mhm.
boundaries of myself completely dissolved. Um, Time didn't exist. Space didn't exist. And I understood while for him, it was a negative. We were puppets. I didn't see it as that. It was more, everyone is me, that you pick up where the Danny game I play leaves off, and that's how we have completion. And it
Right.
came with this idea that there is only one God, and it doesn't understand itself. I don't understand myself, was the thought process. So
Mm.
what better way to gain self-knowledge than to play multiple roles that can interact with itself subjectively,
Mhm.
right? To gain self knowledge through this illusion of multiple players. Um, and it was both ecstatic and absolutely terrifying.
Mm.
And so
Right.
when I came down from that, that's when I said, I'm not doing that again until I can get a picture of why the get a framework for why this happens, some philosophically, what is going on when this happens, because now it's happened to 2 people, myself included. um but again, you know, you get into those Eastern texts and it's in the
Yes.
plainest language ever,
Right.
that
Right.
you're basically, we're fingers on a hand, and in certain states you can chase it up the arm, up the shoulder, and get right into the head of whatever being you're
Mm.
just a digit on. Um so yeah, that was the journey that forced me into a reckoning. Now that's not what I call my spiritual awakening. That was a crisis. My
Mm.
spiritual awakening experience came much later, after I had started working the AA system and was doing yoga every day, and I'd been doing, incorporating one limb at a time. So I had incorporated yama, niyama, asana, and now I'm working on pranayama. And the pranayama, the breathing exercises, energized me to such a degree that I couldn't sleep or I couldn't eat. So I just sat up and did the asana and pranayama for almost 3 days, and something clicked, like a dam broke in my chest. And thankfully, it wasn't like what happened when I became God. It was more this state of total ecstasy that I didn't know what to do with. My only thought was, how can I be of service to
Mhm.
people? And my only solution um, was I was going to all my friends' houses, washing their dishes, sweeping their floors. That's all I could think to do. And my friend Dustin, he was like, Danny, man, you don't have to do that. Come here, why don't you come smoke this joint with me? Let's just chill out. And I'm like, oh, I'm crying in there
Yep.
with joy at sweeping this floor.
Yeah.
Everybody was worried to death about what is wrong with Danny. That's what my friends call me, Danny.
State of
um
samadhi.
it was
Well,
total, and it lasted uh almost as long as it took to get there. It lasted right about 3 days, and by that time I thought this was permanent. Like, this
Yeah.
was this was enlightenment, that this would never go away.
And
But
in
after
some
three
ways, it
days
clears you. Yeah.
I don't want to say I crashed, but
Mm.
I came down and was back at my normal baseline, and I kind of mourned that it went away. um, and
Yeah.
it initially led me to think that enlightenment was a sham, that this was just a trick of body chemistry. It wouldn't be until years later that I realized that enlightenment is not that state. It's attaining that state, coming back down, and allowing what you saw, what you knew in that state, to inform the way you behave when you're at Walmart or when you're in
Right.
traffic.
Mm.
That's enlightenment. That if you are in that state forever,
Hmm.
you're useless. You're useless to everyone around you. You're a buffoon in a way. But if you can come back down, where you have to clock in and out from your job, clean up your own mess, wash the dishes, but still, even if you don't feel it, allow your behavior to be dictated by what you saw and knew in those moments. I think that's closer to what we in the West call, an enlightened state or whatever.
Right.
Something I did want to ask you, it's a little bit different, a little bit off topic, but I think it does go to your, definitely with your book. And I just wanted your opinion. There's been probably like over the last 2 years, there's been times I've covered alchemists or occultists, even poets or writers that might have been openly into the occult, and even some artists. I don't know if it was Jim Morrison specifically, but I started noticing there was a lot of them that chose at some point to write in hexameter, however you say it,
Oh, yeah.
or pentameter. And do you think there's something to that besides just a way of writing? Because I'm sure I think you
Absolutely, I do.
touch on that in your
Um,
book, Theurgy.
with dactylic hexameter, um, in the English language, it's really difficult to write in dactylic hexameter. The closest thing we have is pentameter, and we see people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, they're dipping into that. It's the closest analog. But that's the language that the oracles would speak in. So if you went to the oracle at Delphi, what they gave you back as your oracle was in dactylic hexameter, because it was seen as the language of the dactyls, these beings that live underground or in volcanoes, but they're these divine, sometimes craftsmen, but they're crafting for you this oracle, that usually isn't just encoded and full of symbols, but it works on multiple levels, right? So it has, for the ancient Greeks, it has the potential to create a statement that can be true on more than one level, and that's somehow inherent in the form, not just the words. And there's probably something to be said for rhythms and cadence, just like
Right.
with when we hear rhyming and good alliteration, it creates a trance-like state. Um, and I think dactylic hexameter lends itself to that. I don't think the pentameter is as successful, and it certainly doesn't have the historical weight behind it that dactylic hexameter does. But yeah, Parmenides, Homer, Hesiod, Empedocles, Xenophanes, Heraclitus, all these guys, the earliest really brilliant philosophical, proto-scientific thinkers and magicians wrote this way, spoke this way. The Chaldean oracles is in dactylic hexameter. So
Yeah, I think the
yeah, I
first time,
definitely think it was the meter of choice.
yeah, I think the first time I came across that it was when I was looking into Empedocles, and I think
Yeah.
it was because of the oracles. I think.
Empedocles is so amazing. Um, I don't know if you've read Peter Kingsley's book, Reality. Highly recommended. It's in two parts. The first part is dealing with Parmenides, the second with Empedocles. But it's not just some historian, scholarly, let's talk about what he said. Through reading it, he has this uncanny ability to lure you into that way of thinking. So by the time
Mhm.
you've closed the book, you really feel like you have a kinship with Empedocles, with Parmenides. It's it's in the top, probably the top three most important, amazing books I've ever read.
Nice.
It's funny to me the resistance and yet also love for Parmenides. So like all these other philosophers are reading Parmenides and he says motion is impossible. And
Right.
then they're all just like, "No, you got to be kidding me!" But they loved it so much that they kept it with them the whole time, and I see that as a big influence in the monism of Socrates and all the rest of the
Even
Platonic, Neoplatonic, and he also
even up to,
influenced all of science, right? So
yeah.
this is where ontology comes from.
I was
Yeah.
going to say even up to Walter Russell and his discussions on how light works. There is no
Yeah.
motion.
Yeah. There's a great poet, who was the spiritual mentor to R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. His
Oh yeah.
name's Oscar Vladislaus de Lubitsch Meloz. But he had a spiritual awakening that occurred on Christmas or Easter or Epiphany Day or something. But the revelation was that space doesn't exist. That this is all one full soup that we exist in. And
Right.
a lot of philosophers like to pit Heraclitus against Parmenides, like they're arguing, because Parmenides, he's like you said, he's saying there is no motion, there is no change, there is only being. Non-being cannot be by definition.
Right.
If you can think it, it is. If it is, you can think it. But Heraclitus, he comes along and he says, no, you can't cross the same river twice because it's not the same river and you're not the same man. You know, they're both, I don't think it's so much that they're disagreeing as they're approaching the same problem from different angles. And we might
Mhm.
even say one party, Parmenides, is speaking from a macrocosmic perspective and Heraclitus from a microcosmic perspective,
Mm.
but both are true in that they're both experiential depending on where your head is in that moment. Yeah, I love those guys, the pre-Socratics.
Mm.
Just there's so much there that is misinterpreted, I think, that's dismissed as pseudo knowledge, pseudoscience. But when you really dive into that stuff, um, you start to see that the world might not be what you thought it was.
Mm.
Well,
Mm. Definitely.
Parmenides describes his journey as being sort of like a drug trip, So
Yeah,
he's in this palace of the Queen of the Night, and it's guarded by Themis or DK, right? And then she
Thumis and
opens the door.
DK.
Right. So she opens the door for him, and then all of a sudden he gets the secret of the universe, which is formal logic. This is the first time it's expressed in the formula profile of A equals A. And then you see that carry on to its natural conclusion, which is all motion can't be real. It's none of it's actually happening.
Right.
Only being
Right.
matters.
You'll see a lot of people say that all philosophy is a footnote to Plato. Well, Plato is a footnote to Parmenides. That's why in the Parmenides, he says, we're going to have to kill Father Parmenides because we can't move in any direction until we can get this shit out of the way.
It's so true.
And then it's
Yeah,
funny.
and-
It's funny to understand how then it would make sense for God to divide itself into multiple things for
Yes.
things to be, because otherwise there's
Yeah.
just one thing. Like you cannot have anything else.
One thing. That's right. And that's what I saw. That's
Okay.
why I
Well-
latched on to that so easily, because it's like, oh, I definitely get that.
Yeah. But I was going to say, you get these various stories within the text of like hammering the universe into existence and the various sparks flying out. Or you have like Indra's net where everything is reflecting off everything else and everything is still a part of the whole. These
Mhm.
stories carry through, and you can find similar stories, throughout.
It's the closest analog to something we get from somebody like Max Planck, when we're talking about that at the smallest level, the oxygen molecules, everything is made up of these subatomic particles. If we could see it from that perspective, it would be a three-dimensional mesh web structure,
Right,
with no separation, no division among it.
Quanta.
Yeah. So they're, like I said, they were thinking far ahead of what you would think would be common for an ancient mind.
Hmm.
I love that you guys are so educated on this stuff. I never get to just riff on
Riff.
Yeah.
You're you're able to nerd out a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any more questions? I wanted to ask one more, at least before we wrap it up. I don't want to take away from anybody.
I have one, I guess.
Sure, please.
So I don't know what's the different things that you tried, let's say, but how did you perceive, for example, I had experiences with ayahuasca, with mushrooms, with LSD, with some other stuff. And it's very intriguing that each one of them have a kind of persona, if I may call it like that. Like they present themselves a little bit differently, even though, like you could say, okay, the compounds maybe are a little bit different as well, but there is a similarity in how they behave. So even if it's, let's say, I had different ayahuasca ceremonies with different people, so they were prepared differently, but in theory, it was always kind of the same type of experience. The same with like mushrooms. I had mushrooms the same in Brazil or in another place, and so in theory they're different, but the experience is super similar. So I was wondering if, from your perspective, you could see that as well, and how would you, if you ever try to interpret that, like, would you connect each of, for example, the mushrooms, even the Americans, I guess Central Americans, South Americans, they call it like Tiona Cult or something like that. Like they have a name.
Tiana Nakatl.
Exactly. So or like for ayahuasca, they call it like Mother Aya or whatever. So they kind of already personify it. So even if I'm not into that, let's say I wasn't raised in that way, when I perceive it, I see the same thing. So it's this idea of there's some kind of egregore, maybe if you want to call it. So just curious, how do you perceive it as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm very much, I have a magical worldview, and I think the world is peopled by spirits. I think even the simplest things, like a can of soda, it it participates in mind to the degree that it is capable. Because we're not in a material universe, we're in a mental universe. Like Huxley, and I think even William James before him, mind at large, um, is what we're in, we interpret as material, but this is a mental structure. Um, and so everything participates in mind to the degree that it is capable. And these entheogenic substances, they've been participating in mind much longer than we have. There is a spiritual intelligence to them. There's a being there. And like you said, if you doubt that, take ayahuasca, because I promise you'll encounter a female type figure. You take mescaline or peyote, you will encounter a male like figure. You take salvia divinorum,
Yeah, divinorum.
it will
Yes.
be a female type figure every time. Um, and of course, I struggled with this, especially with LSD, because the high doses of LSD, the visuals are very cartoon-like.
Right.
And I thought, why am I seeing, is it that mundane that I watched cartoons when I was a kid? So now I'm seeing cartoons, but no, I think it has more to do with cartoons exist because just like Parmenides said, if it is, and it's always been a part of this. And it manifests for us in a material realm as something somebody drew and moved the pictures real fast. But that doesn't mean that it came from a vacuum, came from nowhere. And so it raises the question, well, obviously there are no cartoons in a square of blotter paper. Where is this coming from? And I only use that as an example to say that yes, just like with a sacred location, a haunted house, as people would like to call it, but there are spiritus loci. There are geniuses that exist in certain locations, and there are geniuses that exist in certain substances. And when we begin to approach them that way, that's where we really enter magical territory with these substances. You can trip on them, all you want to, but the moment you meet it as an entity, things change. The communication takes place. It's like with dreaming.
Right.
When you wake up in a spiritual awakening, it's almost like waking up and becoming lucid in a dream, because you realize in a dream, it doesn't matter who you're dreaming about, what the room is, they're all you from a
Right.
psychological perspective. I'm playing the role of each person here. I'm playing the role of the room I'm in. And that waking up while you're awake has the effect of. But if you're familiar with dream work, like especially James Hillman, you know, he says the worst thing you can do is look at a dream entity and say, what do you represent? I mean, if you met a new person and instead of them asking you your name, they said, what do you represent? They don't even ask you, they ask themselves, because you're non-existent. What does he represent? What is this? It's offensive. And it's offensive to dream characters as much as it's offensive to the spirits that occupy these plants. So when they appear differently, it's because they are differently. They have their own personalities. Um, And the moment you approach them that way, instead of a means to an end, that they are the end in themselves. I'm here because I want to commune with you. You
Right.
know more than I do about some things. And guess what? I got a nervous system and opposable thumbs. You can use those if you want, if I can get a little bit of access to some of the
Right.
ancient mind you have. That's my approach. So yeah, I definitely think, as new age as I might come off, man, there are spirits in those things. There is intelligence in
Yes.
nature, and it's far surpasses anything mankind has deduced over the however many millennia we've been
Yeah.
running
Well, there.
around on this planet.
Sorry,
So
PD, but there is a theory that the origination or the origin of like magical practices, especially Dharma or Tantra specifically, Tantra Dharma, it originated in the Yaksha cult. So the Sanskrit equivalent of a genius loci, basically like a nature fairy or a nature spirit of like a particular place, tree, plant, but they're often seen as very ferocious. And so what we would say as a Buddhist is that they, even as they appear, it's just an existence appearance. So if you push through that in your own consciousness, then you can see what the core of what they really are, which is also sort of a reflection of your own mind, often, or consciousness. Not necessarily, I'm not saying it's 100% that they're
Not, you're not
100%
saying
composed of
not psychological mind, but the mind, right? You
the
mean
the
higher
primordial, like
mind.
Rigpa is what we would call it, or like
Gotcha.
like that diamond thunder. It's like is Zeus like, but it's not really. It's more Yesodic Tiferet, like in a dialectical relationship.
Yeah, yeah. And from that perspective, there are two valid approaches to this. And I'm using these terms in the sense that anthropologists and historians of religion use them. There's the magical approach, there's the mystical approach. The magical approach is a ladder, and each rung has different types of beings on them. They each are objective, have different things they can tell you, do with you, do for you. The mystical approach is everything between me and the top of that ladder is an illusion. Um, Push past it. If you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. That kind of thinking. The goal for me is just to get to the top, the clear light, the void of nothingness.
Well, we
Both of
would say
those I think are
emptiness. Just
valid.
as let me say, we would say emptiness. It would be luminousness and masslessness. It's not void. Void would be
Well,
at fifth consciousness, and we would actually want to go a little higher. We would want to go to Kether, if you want to use a Kabbalistic sort of example, but
yeah,
it's
I
not
get that, but
voidness.
it's no thingness, as unless you're saying that it's not apophatic, that it isn't devoid of. It's not such that anything you say about it would be wrong because it would be limiting it to that. That's what I'm
Mm.
that's what I'm trying to explain. But I'm not a Buddhist, so
No, I totally get it. I just
the language is probably gonna ruffle your feathers if you are a Buddhist.
it doesn't. It just is. I just enjoy the engagement of like the difference of like perspective or view.
Right.
I
Sure,
think it's
yeah,
very
yeah.
interesting.
But I do think they're both valid. If the mystical approach, I don't care what angel stands between me and the top of the ladder. The magical approach is, oh, today I need to access that part of the ladder, because I'd like to accomplish X. And I think that's the difference. But again, with these substances, I don't think it's always safe to use them as a means to an end. They're the end in themselves. So you wouldn't say, I need to access X rung, so I'm going to utilize X substance. Uh, that's where I think you could get into trouble because you're objectifying a subject.
Mm.
That's what I
So
was meaning.
now, speaking of objectifying a subject, this anecdotally, I have a friend, this is years ago, that he used to sell salvia divinorum on tour. And he was a heavy user of it. And when he started selling it heavily, he had an entity come to him whenever he would use salvia, and it was a male entity that was, he said it kind of looked like a Mayan warrior that had a light bar. And every time he would use the substance when he was selling it, when he went into that state, he had the light bar at his neck, and the warrior was just staring into his eyes. And he said he had to quit selling it.
I know that story. I had the same, it's almost identical, but with mushrooms. Selling mushrooms as a kid.
Yep.
And it wasn't I don't know what it was because it was so large, but a giant foot would come down and threaten to squash me. And it was as real, absolutely terrifying. But yeah, I never sold another mushroom after that.
Yeah.
Wow. So I had a question about Martinism. Now, I've seen that there's a Martinistic influence in voodoo and in Mormonism. Is there, what got you into Martinism? And I know that it has something to do with the Solomonic magic and how they use some of those keys as well. So I was just wondering if you could expand on that.
Well, my interest in Martinism came with my interest in theurgy. Martinism emerged out of the first high degree system of masonry called the Elucoan, which was founded by a man named Martinez de Pascali. And it's a theurgic system that also works. It's kind of a Bramlin-like in that it also works with lower spirits, but the point being, if you're aligned with your daemon, your holy guardian angel, and they align with you, then you're kind of extending salvation, grace into the lower realms of the world. That's what first interested me about it. And also their open use of hallucinogens, which a lot of Martinists won't admit today. But they were using a number of different psychedelics in the initiation rituals of the Elucoan. Now, after the Elucoan officially closed, Louis Claude de Saint Martin had a circle of friends around him that he would continue teaching what he called the way of the heart. So it's no longer ritualistic, no longer theurgic. It's more like he's doing a Plotinus kind of thing. And 2 or 3 of his students or students of students eventually came together and created the Martinist order, which is a 3-degree system similar to Masonry, but with more Rosicrucian elements present. And once you become a Martinist, a 3rd-degree Martinist, Elucoan opens to you. So you can join Elucoan and get access to some of these theurgic protocols that aren't written about openly, aren't discussed. Of course, it's not late antique theurgy, but you're seeing how it developed post grimoire tradition. And that's what interested me mainly was trying to understand how they're fitting things like the Key of Solomon, different grimoires into that model. Because if you look in the Lemegeton, look in the Lesser Key, you'll see it separated into goetic magic and then theurgy. The goetic is dealing with demons, theurgy is dealing with angels. A late antique theurgist would say, no, that's not theurgy. That's dealing with angels. That's working with demons. It has nothing to do with uniting with a god. So I was mainly interested in how it evolved through the years, especially after the emergence of the European grimoire tradition.
Thank you.
Really interesting. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any more questions before I ask him something else? I guess kind of like to wrap it up. I did want to say I did want to ask. I guess like the average person on the street, I guess, came up to you and said why does all this stuff that we were just talking about, the oracles, Neoplatonists, Homer, and all that stuff? Well, why theurgy? Why does any of that matter today in 2025? Like, what's the point? What would you tell somebody if they asked you that?
Two things. I would say it doesn't matter. You're perfect just as you are. Whether you want to or not, you're still uh, uh, at one with God, at one with the gods. Everything is as it should be. Um, but at the same time, we tend to get in our way, think things should be one way. Um, we see the world as we wish it were, not as it is. And I think that from that perspective, theurgy can offer a lot of solace, not solace in terms of how we feel when we butt up against the world, because it does imbue it with a meaning, with a sanctity that is very hard to find, even in the world religions.
Mm,
Um, it's just hard today to go outside and really feel the miracle of being, uh, of everything. And I think that's the biggest thing I've taken away from theurgy is participating in the miracle.
right.
Foraging. When you're foraging and I'm going out and I'm finding heliotrope, I'm participating in Helios, and it just changes the entire dynamic of me against the world. Um, so that's probably the as kind of puzzling as it probably sounds to some listeners. That's my explanation.
I like that. Very well said. I think I mean, not to speak for Jen, but I think like me and him have even discussed it. For myself, I mentioned before with theurgy. When I have practiced that before in my past, that is some of the times when I've actually really felt some sort of like emotional effect, or some sort
Hmm.
of like deep feeling. I
Mm,
think Jen has even said that you've been into like theurgical stuff, and yeah.
Yeah,
So
it
Tantra
unblocks.
can be very theurgic.
Yes, tantra is definitely theurgical, and I would say we do apply our will at specific points, but we would be mindful of the karmic implication of doing so with certain practices for sure. But yeah, I agree with you, Nick. It can be very. We would say it's unblocking the energy centers or the channels. So sometimes, like at heart center, often you will find like people will cry after sadhana. It's very common. So yeah, absolutely. There's many, and there's you can feel anger sometimes. You can feel lust sometimes. You can feel different. It depends on what practice and what text you're doing. But yeah, you can definitely can unblock some of those klipas or those klishas or those skandhas, those aggregates of mind that would prevent you from sort of reaching primordial consciousness for sure.
Yeah,
so much.
there's a great book that might interest you, by a friend of mine named Gregory Shaw. Um, he wrote a book called, his first book was Theurgy and the Soul, which was a deep dive into Iamblichus. But his most recent book is Hellenistic Tantra, and he's comparing Iamblichus's program um, Abhinavagupta, to the early Kaula Tantra, particularly Kashmir Tantra, Southeast Asia. But lots of parallels, especially in the perception of the body, as almost like body as soul and vice versa. But that might be something, Jen, that you would find fascinating.
Thank you, PD. I'll definitely. I've seen it on IG. People like Ike Baker and other people have like
Yeah.
interviewed him. I just haven't listened to them or bought the book, but I will definitely do that. Thank you.
Hmm.
A little
Ike's
bit of a
very
teaser.
good too.
Yeah, actually, I got Ike coming on. I think in a week or so.
Nice.
Nice. Yeah. PD, thank you so much. Before I let you plug everything and let everybody know where they can find your stuff, let me just have the other people remind everybody where they can find them. Jin, real quick, let everybody know where they can find all your amazing stuff.
What's up? Thank you so much, PD. I know it was a little discursive, but I know you're so smart and you can take it. And I really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for teaching me about the more Platonic and Neoplatonic system, which I'm not that familiar with, to be honest. So it was definitely a learning episode for me. And thank you, of course, to the other co-hosts, especially to Nick and Matt Murrah, who is my co-host on the Gray Lodge, which is our co-host like roundtable. We talk about speculative Gnosticism every Friday night, and check us out on YouTube and at thetruegraylodge.com, TRVE truegraylodge.com, and at Threshold Saints if you want to follow me. And I'm interviewing the alt lit author Andrew Thompson and his new book Crowbar, so that'll be dropping really soon. It's supposedly the book of 2025, so I was really lucky to be able to interview him. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Of course. No, thank you for making it, my man. And Headless Giant, what is going on, bud?
Thank you. You can find me on X and on Instagram at the Headless Giant, and you can follow my YouTube channel at the Headless Giant. And if you have any sort of mystical experiences, any kind of a drug experience having to do with these entities or UFOs or anything, you can send it to you can go with the Headless Giant Podcast at gmail.com, and we will read those on Thursdays, and Nick will give you some stickers. So definitely check that out as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, sir. And Matt, my man, what's going on, bud?
Again, thanks a lot for calling me here, Nick, and nice to meet you all. It was a very nice episode. Thanks, PD, for sharing all the stuff. It's cool to see other people practice and get to the same places. And, even if, as obviously we're not going to share every time 100% the same thing, it's cool to understand how others think and so on. And it was very fascinating stuff. So again, thanks a lot for that. And yeah, you guys can find me as it's here at Mentmore19 everywhere: Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, any place. There's also my website, that's Kabbalah.com, KAABALAH.com. And yeah, there's an episode here on Occult Rejects from this, very recent. You guys can check that out as well. It was very nice.
Yes, it is. It's still up on the live, so go check that out. And my man, Robbie Marks, thank you so much for making it today, brother.
Yeah, I'm glad I could make it. Thanks for having me on. And it's great to see everybody. Great to meet the new people. PD, excellent conversation. This is the type of information that I dwell within and kind of have absorbed, since like you were saying, since I was in my early teens. And it's just, it's a great conversation. So thank you so much for that. And if anybody wants to check out my stuff, you can go and check my Linktree, which is Linktree RMARX, and that'll pull up my artwork, my MetaMindcast podcast, all my miscellaneous social media. Any way you want to connect with me is there. And thanks again, Nick.
Of course. Thank you for making it. And finally, PD, I really want to say thank you for coming on. I know it took a while, but it was well worth the wait. I think the other rejects on the show can even say probably within the last 6 months, I've gotten very interested in Neoplatonism and some of the older stuff. So this show is really, really, I truly love the show. So thank you very much for coming on, man. And please let everybody know where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, well, I've had a blast. I mean, like I said, it's very rare that I get to just kind of riff on this stuff. Usually, I'm having to reinvent the wheel, and you guys are already rolling. So this has been a treat for me. As far as where to find me, Facebook, Instagram, X. I usually just post what I'm researching, and you can find me on under PD Newman on all those platforms. Again, my books, all major booksellers, and I'm working on 3 or 4 books right now, kind of juggling them. But before those come out, my colleague Alec Hawkins, he's an award-winning filmmaker out of Columbus, Mississippi. We're finishing up a documentary right now on my second book, Angels in Vermilion, kind of tracing the trajectory of Acacia and the use of DMT from Egypt to Prague to London and finally into Freemasonry. And hopefully that'll be done next spring. But yeah, follow me on any of my social media accounts, and I'll keep you updated on our progress with that. And again, thanks, guys. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you
Yes.
again. And I do think, as far as I know, we got hooked up through Inner Tradition. So I guess if anybody's looking for his books, they should be on that site. So, he should be
Yeah.
on there. Check that out. Thank you again for coming on, and everybody in the chat. That's what's up. Even the people who don't agree with this stuff, I appreciate your opinion and jumping in on the chat. And the people that had stuff to add, that's what's up. Again, I appreciate it, and that's why we go live. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.